It is no exaggeration to describe the campaign of abuse against Sara as torture.
A 10-year-old girl at home, playing her guitar and merrily singing along to it, perfectly happy, it would seem, to be being video recorded while she performs. A cute moment for the girl and her parents to look back on when the girl is older, no doubt. A moment of making memories. 4 days later, minutes after receiving a notably anguished call from a man phoning from as far away as Pakistan, officers from Surrey Police swarm the little girl's home, which is in Woking. They find the 3-bed house spick and span, but also totally empty. In their ensuing search of the property, they find a vacuum cleaner with blood on it, a white metal pole with blood on it, and some black rope with someone's hair entwined in it. The fatal brain injury, which didn't come by accident, that 10-year-old Sara Sharif suffered on the day of this very video recording, isn't what led, 2 days after this point, to her death. The note that was left next to the girl's body said that her father had beaten her to death, exactly as the man himself, Urfan Sharif, 43, had told the police on the 10th of August 2023 on the phone from Pakistan. Do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you.
It is no exaggeration to describe the campaign of abuse against Sara as torture.
Because of the 71 injuries that were found on Sara's body in the course of her post-mortem, Sara's unaliving having taken place on the 8th of August 2023, one was a significant brain trauma caused 10 days before Sara's passing. This is separate to the one caused to Sara by her father 2 days before her passing, which, as I mentioned, would have claimed her life in due course, even if she hadn't sustained any further batterings from her parents. Sara had fractures in her hyoid bone, which is at the top of the neck, and fractures in some of her other neck bones. Sara's spinal column, in fact, had twice been broken. There were fractures in the fingers of Sara's left hand, burns on her ankles, and bite marks both on her left arm and on the inside of her left thigh. The buckle mark found somewhere on her skin came from a belt, while the burns that were found on her bottom came from an iron. Sara had burns on other parts of her body too, had some hair missing because some of it had been ripped out of her head, and, weighing 60 pounds at the time of her passing, had the deterioration to her bones that comes from starvation. Now, if you add up all the injuries that I've just mentioned, you don't get as many as 71. That's because I haven't mentioned all 71, and in fact, the sum total of Sara's separate injuries, the internal ones and the external ones combined, is over 100. You really haven't, as yet, heard the worst of Sara's 4 years of violence and suffering at home. And yes, I mean cricket bats, rolling pins, hoods for catching running blood, and happy slaps.
Sara had been beaten on her head, her face, her chest, her abdomen, and on each of her arms and legs. In addition to the 71 fresh injuries, the medical experts found a total of 25 separate fractures to the bones in Sara's body. These included a fractured collarbone, 2 fractured shoulder blades, fractured ribs, a fractured humerus, 11 separate fractures to her spinal column, and fractures to bones in both of her hands. The medical evidence stated that many of these injuries were highly unusual in a child. They went beyond what would be seen in sporting injuries and were of a severity that is rare even in road traffic accidents. They would have required multiple episodes of violence, each involving a substantial degree of force.
What was wrong with Urfan Sharif, Sara's father, aged 43 at December 2024, Beinash Batool, Sara's stepmother, aged 30 at December 2024, Faisal Malik, Sara's paternal uncle, aged 29 at December 2024, and of course, Sara's biological mother, Olga Dimin, age unknown. The right-wing media's biggest complaint relating to the extreme violence that Sara suffered in her home doesn't actually relate to Sara's suffering at all.
This piece of, exploited EU rules to stay in the United Kingdom, okay? He decided to marry a Polish woman, a Polish woman in a sham marriage so that he could stay in our country.
There were fears that this awful father, as Urfan, was torturing her, that she was constantly bruised, and nothing was done. Nothing was done. We'll talk about that in a second, but we also need to discuss what the hell this guy was even doing in this country.
For me personally, the biggest complaint to come from the torture and murder of Sara, whose main perpetrator was her father, is more the father's evil and violence, and less how, as a native of Pakistan, he came to win UK residency. The father's evil and violence pervaded all his known relationships too. Born in Pakistan on the 25th of November 1981, the father was the eldest boy in his family comprising of at least 4 boys and 2 girls. Born in 1995, Faisal himself was the youngest of them all. At the point when the father came to the UK, Brexit wasn't even on the horizon. In other words, in 2003, when the father came over to England to study, having entered the UK on a student visa, an EU national living in the UK had the same automatic right as a UK national to live and work in the UK. Importantly, this right could be conferred, by marriage no less, to a non-EU or non-UK national. I can't say why, once he arrived in England, the father chose to target EU nationals rather than UK nationals in his mission to find a wife. I also don't know why he had an exclusive preference for Polish women. But anyway, the man's relationship with his first Polish girlfriend didn't lead to marriage. It led to the father's arrest. The father met Angelica in 2007 when they were both working at Burger King and when Angelica was just 18. In her report to the police about the father, she said that her now ex-boyfriend had locked her in a bedroom against her will, nicked her passport, punched her in the face and shouted at her while squeezing her face, "Do not go to your friends, I want to see you always at home." That was all a quotation. She claimed additionally that the man threatened to unalive her and then pointed a knife at her.
I was at home, he was at work, and when he get a break from work, he just came home and start shouting on me. He's start looking in my pockets, start pushing me. He pushed me on the couch and he grabbed the knife. And he squeezed my cheeks and grabbed the knife and put the knife in my neck. And he said that I'm his and only his.
And you reported it? What happened? What did the police say?
Yes, I reported in the police station.
Nothing came of the father's arrest, however. Likewise, he doesn't seem to have faced any criminal proceedings for stealing £1,700 from the till at the McDonald's where he worked before moving to Burger King. Being sacked seems to have been all that he suffered. I don't know how, on the visit that he made to Poland in 2009, the father met Anna, his second Polish girlfriend, or how he persuaded her, as he did, to come and live with him in England straight away. Like Angelica though, on leaving the man no more than 2 weeks after moving in with him, Anna filed a report with the police alleging that the father had falsely imprisoned her, 5 days being the duration of that offence. She also claimed that he had choked her with a belt. Once again though, after arresting the father, the police took no further action against him. When, later in 2009, she met the father, Olga Dymin, a Polish woman, already had a child from a previous relationship. This was no barrier to marriage for the father, however, he and Olga getting married that same year. Yes, their marriage, which was fully legal, began just before the father's student visa expired. But if the man had been a kind, loving and devoted husband and father, as well as a law-abiding citizen, would we be complaining about that? Our one true complaint about the man is, or should be, that he was the complete opposite of kind, loving and law-abiding. The man was also both a drinker and a gambler. Olga's child may or may not have been the child from one of the father's 3 Polish girlfriends that the father both beat black and blue and burned. One of his 3 girlfriends, which could again have been Olga, had a 1-month-old baby who, on at least one occasion, the father bit. Olga and the father stopped living together at some point between 2010, when their son was born, and the 11th of January 2013, when Sara was born. Less than a year into the marriage, the father was arrested for assaulting his wife. Olga also reported to the police that, as well as hitting her, her husband had taken her phone away from her and kept her locked in a room. At a later stage, Olga complained to the police that, having since become financially controlling as well, her husband wasn't giving her enough money for food and rent. For the third time though, nothing came of the father's arrest over these allegations. Having had the involvement in her life of social services even before she was born, in November 2014, Sara was placed in care. Her mother subsequently accepted a caution for ABH, actual bodily harm, section 47 under the Offences Against the Person Act 1861. Olga's act of biting her toddler daughter, you see, was why Sara was taken into care. Even so, when Olga visited her daughter, she told those looking after her of her husband's former threats to unalive her and of his having threatened her with a knife. When, in 2017, Olga's divorce from the father was finalised, the father was granted twice weekly supervised visits to both Sara and her brother, while Olga was granted full custody of the two. I don't know at what point Olga became an alcoholic or when she became a drug user. She may have had those addictions before she met the father. But in any event, in 2019, the father was awarded custody of both Sara and her brother. This change was triggered by the children's complaints of abuse against their mother, Sara specifying that her mother had tried to both drown her in the bath and burn her with a lighter. These claims were never proven, however. By the time Sara and her brother went to live with their father, the man had 3 other children, twin girls who were born in January 2016 and a boy who was born in December 2018. The father had finished with Olga for good in 2015, shortly after meeting the new woman in his life, the mother of his new children. Born in the UK on the 14th of July 1994, Beinash Batool was from a, quote, very traditional, unquote, Pakistani family. She had a strict upbringing centred around the family's Muslim faith, is what this means. Having 3 sisters and a brother, in 2012, aged 17 or 18, Batool was taken into a refuge for victims of honour-based violence. Having been abused in some way by her uncle, assaulted by her grandfather, and then held prisoner at home were the woman's reasons for having fled her family home. She had only been allowed out of the house after agreeing not to marry who she wanted to marry, a man called Ali Raza Mir, and had then taken the opportunity to go to the police. The criminal convictions that she subsequently got, however, came from the offences of jewellery theft and fraud by false representation that she committed at the refuge that the police took her to. While she gained a criminal record for those offences, she walked free from court with nothing more than a conditional discharge. She didn't even get a community order then, or a fine. Anyway, like Olga Dimin's own, the stepmother's marriage to the father was, by all accounts, shit. Not allowing any of his wife's family to come and see the woman when she was in hospital giving birth to her 4th child, and not himself being with the woman while she gave birth out of choice. The father allegedly slapped his new wife around during the first year of their marriage. He appears, though, to have only been physically abusive towards the stepmother in the course of his 8 years with the woman on occasion. His 6th and final child was 4 months old when, in November 2022, the father told the stepmother that, unlike all his previous threats to divorce her, the one that he was making now, involving the trip to Pakistan that he subsequently made, was real. For her part, after seeking legal advice in February 2022 about getting a divorce, the stepmother took the matter no further. Constant threats of divorce, the father occasionally whacking his wife, the father going to his home country and telling his wife that he wouldn't be coming back. The marriage between the father and the stepmother was shit.
There is no doubt that you were subject to coercion and control by Urfan Sharif. For example, he refused to attend the birth of your youngest child, and he forbade your family members from accompanying you at the birth. But you have a strong character, and you could have stood up to Urfan Sharif in relation to his treatment of Sara if you had been motivated to do so.
Due to his cultural background, which he shared naturally with his brother, Faisal Malik was bound to look up to his elder brother and not to interfere for any reason in the way in which the man ran his household. This is what Malik's barrister argued in court, the 3 adults each having had a different barrister and a different defence. Malik moved in with his eldest brother and his family in December 2022 when he came to England to study, exactly as his eldest brother had done nearly a decade before. Due to the age difference between the two brothers, as well as the length of time during which the father had lived in England, Malik hardly even knew his eldest brother. We've learned by this point that the father was a sadistic, violent bully, but we still haven't learned why he was so particularly cruel towards his second-born child. We also don't yet know what the stepmother did to earn, alongside her husband, her conviction for murder, or what the uncle did, or failed to do, that earned him his 16-year prison term for causing or allowing the death of a child. I admit that we can probably tell what omissions from the uncle led to his criminal conviction. Lastly, we still don't yet know where the biological mother was after losing custody of her two youngest children to their father, or, to be precise, why she failed to rescue her daughter from the father and the stepmother. The many WhatsApp messages that the stepmother sent her sisters exposing her husband's violence towards his eldest daughter began shortly after Sara moved in with the father and the stepmother, which was in the month of March of 2019. At this point, 6-year-old Sara had two 3-year-old sisters, the twins, who suffered from autism and from global developmental delay, and whose behaviour was becoming increasingly challenging. I don't know exactly how though. She also had a 1-year-old brother who had health problems as well. The family was still living in their small flat in West Byfleet when Sara's last sibling, another boy, was born. The judge of the trial, Mr Justice John Kavanagh, deemed that the 3-bed house in Horsell, Woking, that the family moved into in April 2023, was still, like their previous home, far too small for a family of 8, which, 4 months earlier, with the arrival of the uncle, had been topped up to 9. The behavioural challenges coming from the twins only aggravated the home's insufficiency of space. Not long after moving into her father's home, Sara became the family servant, or, to use the word that the judge himself used, the family skivvy, doing the laundry by hand and hanging it out, tidying the home up, and playing a major role in looking after the youngest of the family when he came along, were some of the tasks that Sara was forced to perform. The girl was only 6 or 7 herself when she was forced into the domestic servitude that I've just described. When the stepmother gave birth to her 4th and final child, the father responded to Sara's attempts to play with her new baby brother, who the father was cuddling, by casually and cruelly slapping Sara away. In the video showing this, which the jury was shown, Sara had a bruise on her forehead. The jury was also shown a video, recorded by the father himself, in which the father slaps his daughter round the face 3 times in a row. On the first slap, Sara actually smiles, weirdly enough. On the second slap, she makes no reaction at all. But when, on the third slap, she protests by saying, "Hey," the video ends. The father's explanation for inflicting those 3 slaps on his daughter was that it was just a bit of play, and that the 3 slaps were in no way harmful or abusive. He elaborated that the fact that Sara didn't cry after the first slap was proof that that slap wasn't that harsh. The father affirmed, additionally, that Sara was used to being slapped round the face by him. Going to bed didn't necessarily guarantee Sara a break from the violence and cruelty from her father that had long since become a commonplace in her life. The night where the father woke her up and made her do an endless set of sit-ups as a punishment for hiding his keys is, according to the judge, just one example of however many occasions there were when the father would wake his daughter up from her sleep in the middle of the night in order to physically punish her for something. Pulling Sara out of school in June 2022 was the father's response to news that the school planned to report to social services the bruise that they had noticed under Sara's left eye. However long the father homeschooled Sara for, by January 2023 she was back in school. Any facial injuries, if any, that the girl sustained between then and March 2023 were covered by the hijab that she wore from January 2023 onwards. While neither the stepmother nor the twin girls wore any such dress, the fact that Sara now did was hardly a crime. On being yanked out of school for a second time by the father in April 2023, Sara was never to return to formal education. In light of Sara's departure, the school chose once again not to report Sara's potential abuse to social services. They had, the month before, again warned the father that they would be reporting the injuries that they had seen on Sara's face, the bruises on this occasion being under Sara's right eye and on her chin. Here is the head teacher herself, full of sadness and grief at Sara's death.
It's hard to put into words, actually. I don't think I've ever felt such sadness.
This same woman, though, had at least 2 opportunities to rescue Sara, deciding, however, on each of the 2 occasions that Sara was taken out of school by the father that she no longer needed to intervene in Sara's case, she did nothing. Even if she was legally entitled not to act for Sara once Sara came off roll, which happened twice, the woman both could and should have acted for Sara out of personal compassion. Since Sara's story came to public attention, for instance, many have protested that her family's neighbours, parties with no legal obligation whatsoever towards Sara, who were forever hearing Sara's screams, should, again out of compassion for an innocent child, have come to Sara's rescue. The head is accountable for everything that goes on in her school. Even if she personally wasn't going to act for Sara after Sara left, she should have ensured that someone else from the school, the safeguarding lead being who I have in mind, did. There was no evidence to show that Sara had, on being taken out of school by the father, been offered any sort of teaching and learning at home whatsoever. The school saw the bruises on Sara's face in March 2023 because the hijab that the father and the stepmother had made Sara start wearing to hide the facial injuries that she suffered as a result of their abuse didn't cover the front of her face. Furthermore, this was either an occasion where the stepmother didn't try to cover Sara's facial injuries with makeup, unlike on many previous occasions, or an occasion where the makeup, for whatever reason, just didn't work. The pole that the father used on numerous occasions to batter his daughter, including the final fatal battering that he inflicted on her, came from a high chair. From the marks that were found on Sara's body, tram lines to be precise, it was clear that many of these pole beatings were recent. If you want further examples of the ramping up in the last 8 weeks or so of Sara's life, of the violence and savagery that the girl suffered at home, you need to hear about her many cricket bat beatings from that period. As regards those particular acts of savagery, when asked at trial whether he could imagine the pain that Sara felt when, at any one time, he repeatedly struck her with the said weapon, the father answered, no, he couldn't. Now that should dispel any lingering doubts that we may have had about the man's thorough remorselessness and lack of empathy for his daughter. Some of the 18 rolls of masking tape that the stepmother ordered in this period were used to stick down the plastic bag that she and the father put over Sara's head on one occasion before beginning that particular day's battering of Sara. With the rest of the tape, they tied Sara's hands together behind her back. Catching the blood that would pour from the injuries to Sara's head and face while they bashed her face and head was one reason of her 2 attackers for hooding her with a bag. Having battered their daughter in the head and face on God knows how many previous occasions, as shown by the bruises to Sara's face that were noticed by the teachers at Sara's school, for instance, the father and stepmother seem to have decided to take steps on this occasion to stop Sara's blood getting on everything. I don't actually know, however, whether there was this one occasion of hooded torture against Sara or whether there were more. The other reason, at any rate, of Sara's 2 attackers for their hooded torture of Sara, however many occasions of that there were, was simply, said the judge, for the fun of it.
You failed to protect her from gratuitous degradation consisting of the restraints and hooding.
I don't know what the father and or the stepmother did to Sara with the rolling pin, but I'm guessing that it was something that was both violent and ugly. Likewise, whatever they did to Sara with the hoover and with some black rope, the blood on the hoover found in the home and the hair entangles in the black rope also found in the home, both belonging to Sara, was, I believe, violent and cruel again. There was at least one occasion when the father repeatedly bashed his daughter on the head with a mobile phone. There was at least one occasion when the stepmother chewed Sara's left arm and the inside of Sara's left thigh. That's how the bite marks to those areas of Sara's body got there. Owing to the particular level of sadism involved both in the acts that caused the respective injuries to Sara's hyoid bone and to her bottom, and in the act that caused one of Sara's 2 brain injuries, the judge went into the detail of those acts.
The medical experts identified a fracture in the hyoid bone in Sara's neck. This is a very unusual injury and was the result of very vigorous and energetic manual strangulation, quite possibly on more than one different occasion. Sara sustained a serious brain injury a few days before she died as the result of a blow to her head. I have no doubt that you, Urfan Sharif, were responsible for these injuries. In addition, she had 2 open burn wounds on her buttocks. These were in the shape of the sole plate of an iron and matched the iron that was found in the house. These wounds had undoubtedly been caused by Sara's buttocks being pressed for several seconds against the hot plate of the iron, no doubt as a punishment. This would have required 2 people to carry out, one to hold Sara down and the other to press Sara against the iron. I am sure that you, Urfan Sharif, and you, Beinash Batool, jointly inflicted this injury. One of the most disturbing features of this whole case is that the burns expert, Dr. Martin, said that this injury was sustained at least 2 weeks and more likely 2 to 6 weeks before death. He said that it would have been very painful. So, Sara had this terrible wound in her buttocks for a number of weeks before she died, but nobody had properly treated it or sought medical help for her. Had she lived, it would have caused permanent disfigurement. In addition, when she died, Sara had open burn wounds on the bones of the inside of each ankle. The only possible explanation for this, as is made clear by the medical evidence, is that Sara's ankles were tied and then either her feet were wrapped around a hot pipe or, more likely, boiling water was poured on her ankles. Once again, the wounds had not been treated and no medical help had been sought for Sara.
If I've given you the impression, by signalling the particular cruelty to the 3 acts of violence against Sara, whose details you've just heard, that those complete the acts of savagery that Sara suffered, the burns that were found on Sara's ankles came either from Sara's ankles having been tied somehow to a hot pipe, or more probably from their having been doused with boiling water. The vomiting and soiling of herself that Sara sometimes found herself doing as an involuntary response to the beatings inflicted on her by the father were punished by the father by further beatings. The pull-up nappies that Sara was made to wear during the many hours of each day in some periods during the last 8 weeks of her life, when her hands, along with her ankles, were bound, were too small. Not only was the girl made to literally sit in her shit, or, as the judge put it, to stew in her waste matter for hours on end, her aforementioned ankle injuries were exacerbated by their contact with her very shit and piss. Sara's nappies were too small, remember, so, with Sara's legs always being folded so as to position her ankles directly beneath her bottom, when her nappies leaked, as they invariably did, Sara's waste matter inevitably got onto Sara's ankles. Untying Sara to at least let her go to the toilet, the father and stepmother were just not prepared to do. That would have spoiled the fun of Sara's torture. That said, they at least made breathing holes in the plastic bags that they stuck over Sara's head and kept on her while keeping her trussed up, for which they used their famous parcel tape plus a skipping rope. Hooding Sara then wasn't something they only did when they were bashing her head in, of which there was at least one occasion, as I related earlier. Calling the father home to get him to punish Sara whenever the girl was misbehaving is something that the stepmother took to doing in the last weeks of Sara's life. The father always met the stepmother's wishes for him to come home and to beat the shit out of his daughter willingly, but not necessarily hurriedly. On the 8th of August 2023, the stepmother called the father home, not because Sara was misbehaving, but because she seemed worryingly sick. The father was happy to come home, but took his time, stopping off to buy vapes first. Taking for granted, when, having returned home, he saw Sara floppy in the stepmother's arms, that his daughter was faking her sickness, the father immediately took to repeatedly whacking her on the belly with his trusty metal pole. All the violence and savagery that Sara suffered after moving in with her father and his new family was inflicted on her in front of her siblings and or within their hearing. None of her siblings were abused. On this point, the judge implied that Sara's older brother used to bully Sara in response to encouragement from the father, who instilled in his son the belief that Sara was inferior to him. The boy, however, was, by all accounts, saddened, if not horrified, when his sister was unalived. It was his frantic text message to a friend of his in which he announced that his sister had just died, Sara's passing having taken place moments after the girl had her belly bashed in by her father, that later enabled the police to tell Sara's time of death. To think, this was the girl just 2 days before her unaliving. You just can't see a trace of the violence and cruelty, if any, that she suffered that very day, say, or at any point before then. How, after the trussing up, the nappies, the starvation, the cricket bat and the metal pole, was the girl able to strum her guitar and sing along to it? She filmed this video herself, in case you're wondering. In Sara's notebook, which was found by the police, there were statements from Sara telling the father and the stepmother how sorry she was for being rude to them and for answering them back, and imploring them to forgive her. There was a message specifically for the father on the occasion of his birthday, thanking him for looking after both her and her siblings on the weekend and for making them food then as well. Sara wrote that her family was the best in town and that they spread love all around the world. Her praise for her father for earning money so that the family could eat, sleep and have shelter was particularly touching. The girl had basically been brainwashed.
Amongst the most heartbreaking pieces of evidence in this case were a short story that Sara wrote, which described you, Beinash Batool, as a queen who is beautiful and young. A birthday card in which she said, "Happy birthday, Dad, I love you so much." The reality was that abuse, which for anyone else would be exceptional, had become normalised for this little girl. She had known nothing else for much of her life. You, Urfan Sharif and Beinash Batool, had persuaded her that she deserved the treatment that you meted out to her.
Sara wasn't a particularly badly behaved child. The behaviour of the twins, for instance, was far more challenging than hers ever was, but they, thankfully, were never touched. I'll soon show, however, that their not having been subjected to any physical abuse at home is unlikely to have had anything to do with their special needs.
A moving victim impact statement was read to the court from Sara's mother, Olga Domin. She finds it hard to understand how anyone would behave in such a way towards a small child. Ms. Domin has suffered greatly as a result of Sara's death, which has had a damaging impact upon her mental health. She had the small consolation that Sara's body was returned to her for the funeral in Poland.
Not wanting her children to be raised as Muslims, Olga, Sara's mother, fought hard to stop the court granting the father custody of them. It would appear, no less, that Olga soon gave up trying to see her two youngest children when, despite her official entitlement to fortnightly visits to them, the father systematically blocked her from seeing them. For this reason, Olga didn't see her daughter once in the last 4 years of her life. Seeing Sara during at least the last 8 weeks of Sara's life and seeing in the process her daughter's many severe injuries might have made all the difference to her daughter. The uncle, meanwhile, never laid a finger on Sara. However, he stood back and did nothing while the father and the stepmother ironed her, strangled her, chewed her and belted her. This made him liable for the offence of causing or allowing the death of a child, for which, as I said earlier, he's now doing 16 years. Judge said that however much he may have been in awe of his big brother, as the 28-year-old man that he was during his time in his brother's home, he knew that rescuing Sara would have been the right thing to do. His reverence for his eldest brother then was the uncle's explanation for his failure to act for Sara. His arguments from the trial that he literally saw no evil and heard no evil in the home didn't wash with the judge for even a minute.
I have no doubt whatsoever that you, Faisal Malik, were aware of the campaign of torture that was being perpetrated against Sara, primarily by your brother. The house and the flat were too small and too overcrowded for there to be any other realistic conclusion.
At the point when she started sending her sisters WhatsApp messages relaying the father's brutality towards his daughter, which again was not long after Sara moved in with them, the stepmother hadn't yet laid a finger on Sara herself. In the last 8 weeks of Sara's life, however, she was frequently heard by her neighbours screaming and swearing at Sara. Then there was the ironing, the parcel tape, the hooding, the vampirism, the nappies, and the calls to the father to please come home now and batter his mouthy little cunt of a daughter. But even in the years before she became actively abusive towards Sara, the stepmother had done precious little to protect Sara from her father's savagery. If anyone in the home was possessed by a jinn, a demon that is, which, as she told her sisters, the stepmother thought was Sara's own case, it wasn't her devastatingly abused, diabolically neglected, and incomprehensibly unloved 10-year-old stepdaughter. Sara wasn't the stepmother's own. This was the one and only reason for the stepmother's decision first not to do anything about the father's savagery towards his daughter, and then to take part in the savagery herself. She didn't mistreat Sara's older brother, who, like Sara, wasn't her own, simply because the father didn't mistreat the boy. The other children in the home were her own. For this reason, the stepmother didn't physically abuse them. Wanting to show his oldest daughter, who would stand up to him when he tried to bully her, who was the boss, was why the father systematically battered, tortured and degraded his eldest daughter. This is, of course, on top of the fact that A, she was not the daughter of his new wife, and B, she was a girl.
As for your motives, Urfan Sharif, your beatings and other abuse of Sara, you treated her in such a way because you considered it to be your right to impose harsh discipline upon her. Sara was a brave, feisty and spirited child. She was not submissive as you wanted her to be. She stood up to you. You considered that her behaviour entitled you to chastise her physically, and I have no doubt that your ego and sense of self-importance were boosted by the power that you wielded over her and the rest of the family. In fact, Sara was not particularly badly behaved. She was a normal child of her age. The beatings began when she was 6 or 7. Sara never did anything that might conceivably have justified any part of the treatment that she endured.
The uncle may be released after serving 2/3 of his 16-year sentence. The stepmother, however, has to do a minimum of 33 years before being considered for parole, while the father has to do a minimum of 40 years before he can be considered for parole. If and when the two are released, they will have to live by strict conditions for the rest of their lives. If they violate any one or more of those conditions, they'll be sent straight back to prison for any length of time. While a life sentence, which is what the father and the stepmother are now doing, doesn't literally mean being locked up forever, life after release from prison for anyone who is ever subjected to one such punishment is never the same again. Ha! The father and the stepmother. Never once feeling that the way in which they were treating Sara was wrong and that they should stop treating her in that way. Never once stopping to think how she must have been feeling when they hurt and degraded her. Running away to their home country after unaliving Sara with their 5 remaining children, thinking that being on the other side of the world would enable them to dodge the consequences of Sara's unaliving. Yes, the day he arrived in Pakistan, the father called Surrey Police and directed them to Sara's body after tearfully confessing to unaliving his daughter and promising to return within days or weeks.
I physically punished my daughter and she died. I beat her up. It wasn't my intention to kill her, but I beat her up too much.
He said the same thing in the note that he left by Sara's body.
Love you, Sara. Whoever see this note, it's me, Urfan Sharif, who killed my daughter by beating. I'm running away because I'm scared, but I promise that I will hand over myself and take punishment.
Yes, the stepmother sent the media, Sky News to be exact, a video message, once again promising the return to England of both her and her husband.
Firstly, I would like to talk about Sara. Sara's death was an incident. Our family in Pakistan are severely affected by all that is going on. The groceries have run out and there is no food for the kids as the adults are unable to leave their homes out of fear of safety. That is why we have gone into hiding. Lastly, we are willing to cooperate with the UK authorities and fight our case in court.
But in court, it was revealed that the two only returned because the father's family pressurised them into doing so. If not, the father and the stepmother would have just stayed on the run on the other side of the world forever. No comment police interviews. No testimony from the stepmother or the uncle in court. The lies that the fucking father told in court, claiming that, other than the game of happy slaps that he played with his daughter, he never laid a finger on her. No hint of remorse from the father or the stepmother or the uncle. As at December 2024, the couple's remaining 5 children are still over in Pakistan. At the last update, they were in the care of their paternal grandfather. Sara, I'm sorry. We're all sorry. You deserve to still be here. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.